children or animals?
I'm the animal.
Right, this is a quickie about my short stay in Nicaragua, and particularly with Mariposa, which is the collection for this month and next month, or last month and this month. But to understand what was happening at Mariposa, it's important that we also understand the political and social context of Nicaragua. So I'm going to give you a brief history lesson as well, so I hope you're up for that. Right, so where are we? Okay, so here we've got the mass of the United States of America and Mexico in the north. We've got Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Guyana here. And we've got this spit of land, which as you can see includes Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador and Guatemala. And it's of strategic importance because it links the two large land masses. So it's a major route through which all trade, finance, slaves, gold needs to travel. And also it's the link between the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. So it's been, people have always wanted to control this particular area of land. Nicaragua, all these states are relatively modern constructions. The area for Nicaragua, the Mayans had Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and little bits of Nicaragua, but that area that we now call Nicaragua was controlled until the sort of 1500s by 7 tribes with 7 languages, 7 distinct cultures. But they got on together, and every 7 years they would elect an overarching chieftain to run the shop. So it's all very egalitarian. Until 1522, which was the arrival of Gil Gonzalez de Aguilar, and he gave them the choice of conversion or be slaughtered. Now we are told that the decrease in population was the result of polio, measles, and smallpox. The population went from approximately, as far as we can guess, work out, about 760,000 to 35,000. And so the current narrative is that it was disease, it wasn't the nasty Spanish doing evil deeds. That's not how it's seen locally, however. Locally, it was slaughter, manipulation, and the systematic extermination of different tribes by Gonzalez de Avila. They say, well, there are a couple of myths. They didn't have the wheel, and they didn't have writing. Well, it was true they didn't have the wheel, but they did have writing. And there were texts made of the slaughter of the locals, kept by both the inhabitants and by priests. However, it was deemed any indigenous writings were deemed to be heretical, and so they were all burnt on site. However, there were 5 codices that remain. 1 in Dresden, 2 in Madrid, and 3 in Mexico. And it was quite a sophisticated writing system. And some of it's actually quite funny because they use characters as well as symbols and writing. So some of them are quite cartoonish, it's humour, and they have a way of writing that describes music and singing and things. It was quite an interesting way of writing. So there is a written history on the slaughter, the extermination of those tribes. Okay. So, once the Spanish arrived, they set themselves up in two fiefdoms really. There's Leon up here and Granada. And they spent the next 200 or 300 years fighting over which city province was going to rule Nicaragua. It was made a little bit more interesting because this river here, the San Juan here, allowed English pirates in. So not only did we have Granada and Leon battling it out, but English pirates regularly came in and destroyed Granada, the colonial city of Granada. And wherever I've gone around Central or South America, you could always find that Drake has been there before and slaughtered the population. Absolutely disgraceful. So there's a 200-year history of conflict in this particular area. Then we have the start of the American intervention in the region, which has been uniformly negative, not only in Nicaragua, but all the other countries. The first bit was the Treaty of Guadalupe. America declared war on Mexico in 1846, and after 2 years they had decimated the Mexican army. And the President Polk, wanted Mexico completely destroyed. But his lead negotiator at the time got wind of the fact that he wanted to send an army down and completely wipe them out. And it took a week for the notice to get through, so he knew he had a week to get some kind of resolution. And he actually negotiated a treaty at the point of a gun, but he did get a treaty. And 55% of the population of the land of Mexico was ceded to America. And it included California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, with parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming. So that was purchased for the sum of $15 million, which I'm sure is a lot of money, but I think they got a good deal out of it. So he was then recalled back to Washington, where he was promptly sacked. But they did double the size of the United States of America. But at the same time, there was a chap called William Walker. Has anyone heard of William Walker? No, did you pick up Lorraine, William Walker?
I may have, I've probably forgotten.
No, Lorraine managed because Lorraine has been to Nicaragua several times before. Right, William Walker was a publisher and anti-slavery. I think he was in Arkansas, I think. But he saw that Mexico was weak and he wanted to become president of Mexico. So he put together a mercenary army and marched on Mexico, because it was in such a weak, debilitated position. The Mexicans managed to get a big enough army and counter him and threw him out. So he didn't succeed, but he went north with his army. So, going back to Leon and Granada, this tussle was still going on between the two major states, and Leon saw an opportunity to wipe out the city-state of Granada. And so they invited William Walker to bring his army south and attack Granada. William Walker was then funded by the American government to do so and marched south, and in fact he did. He crushed Granada, and once again, in the grand tradition of the British, he levelled it. However, he forgot to give it back to the Leonese, and he marched on Leon, and he took over the whole of Nicaragua and declared himself president of Nicaragua. Flushed with its success, he turned his army south and marched on Costa Rica. At this point, the governments across Central America realised that something was amiss, and they banded together, and he was captured in Honduras in 1860 and put before a firing squad. These are selected elements that bring us to the 20th century. Right. Zelaya, liberal, he wanted to have a canal across to join the two, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. He turned down the Americans, turned down the British, and he got money from the Germans to put in his canal. The Americans didn't appreciate this, and so they sent their army in, and there was 25 years of violence and conflict as a military incursion into Nicaragua. They were based there, the American army. And in the 1920s, Sandino mobilized the peasants against the Americans and the Somozas, and eventually, in 1933, the American army was ousted. We're getting fairly recent stuff. But Sandino didn't get in power. The Somozas were still left in power. And they remained in power for 40 years, supported by the American government. And then in 1972, there was a major earthquake, and Managua fell. And it was so destructive, they got funds from all across the world. It never even touched Nicaraguan soil and went straight into the bank accounts of the Somoza family. This really was the last straw, and it started this peasant revolt against the right-wing government and right-wing family. In '77, there was a more formalised revolution, left-wing Sandinistas. Britain and the European community were funding the Sandinistas, and the Americans were funding the Somozas. 79, Somoza fled to Paraguay, and the Republican government was still supporting right-wing, but the country was left in poverty, homelessness. It was on its knees, and then we come up to the 80s. So it was in such a poor state, the Americans started feeling guilty about what they'd done, and Carter allocated an aid package of 75 million. A couple of years later, Reagan, this will be in your memories, I should imagine, the fact we had Soviet and Cuban advisors in Nicaragua, and they suspend aid, but they start funding the rebels, the Contra rebels, across Nicaragua. The US then threatens, they were sandwiching them, and they threatened to come in via Honduras, and the result was $700 million worth of arms from Russia and Cuba to the Sandinistas. So because of their actions, the left-wing government, the Sandinistas are now getting more and more arms. The response is the CIA mines the Nicaraguan ports and commences a program of assassinations across Nicaragua. 84 elections confirmed the Sandinistas in power and Daniel Ortega as president for the first time. And then the response to that is that the US imposes a trade embargo which stops all trade with neighbouring countries and plunges Nicaragua into another period of desperate social and economic decline. So that the summary is that there's a history of interference and violence on the part of the Americans. The Americans continue to support right-wing governments across Central America and object to left-wing, democratically elected governments. Later on in the 80s, there is a population move against the left-wing government. The country was on its knees with Ortega, and it couldn't pull itself together. So Violeta Barres de Chamorro was brought in, and she was a coalition president, first female president in Nicaragua, and Ortega leaves. And as a result of that, money starts coming back into the country. However, this is the last bit of the history, by the way. Ullman, he starts developing the infrastructure, program on education and literacy. All students were taken out of university and asked to go into the villages to teach English and maths. They upped the ante very, very quickly, together with healthcare, but earned himself a place on the list of the 10 most corrupt public officials of all time. Then there was a following election, and Ortega once more got into power and remains in power to this day. Right, so now we get on to how it fits in with Mariposa. So, going back to the 80s. So, Paulette Gouge, she was a social worker in London and in, I think, Yorkshire. She had been out during some of the revolutionary periods, helping out with guerrillas. And her idea was to revitalise the local economy in San Juan de la Concepcion and develop a project based on socialist principles. This was an era of great optimism, that working together in small communities, we can be self-sustaining. And her vision was to build a school to teach Spanish, and it would attract American students with American dollars into the area. They would stay with families, homestay, and so families would benefit. The idea was the building and the land that she bought would be eco-friendly and sustainable. She bought 10 acres around the school. She bought half a mountain and a valley, and some areas in the north where they were going to keep some horses. I'll come on to that in a minute. So the idea would be eco-friendly and sustainable. They would grow their own food. Any surpluses they would sell in the markets and reinvest in the projects. They developed an out-of-school project for children to maintain those literacy levels, which has become even more important as the education system has collapsed. The school is one of the few areas teaching children in the local area. They developed a rehab project. I'll come on to that a bit more as well in a minute. A rehab aimed at children with deformities, both genetic and so on. Since the government has continued to spiral down and collapse, there's been logging, destruction of forests. So there's a reforestation project, and there's a huge nursery. They plant thousands and thousands of trees every year. And they try to model what a sustainable forest would be like, because there's no information available to local people, well, across the country at all, on how to maintain one's personal health, community health, or the national health. So by practicing reforestation, it's hopefully they're modelling on this is what you can do. They introduced a horse rescue, equine therapy, lobbying and campaigning, and a cat and dog rescue with a sterilisation program. So the Mariposa building, built in the 80s, it's got about 20 rooms. It's fairly basic. There's a bed, curtains, there's a flush toilet, cold water, and a fan, and that's about it really. But it's sufficient. The climate's good, so you don't need heating or anything too fancy. As I say, it's set in 10 acres of forest. It's just another shot of the school. Each student has their own teacher, so it's one-on-one, and this is my classroom. It is a major source of employment in the area. When all the students are there, there are about 75 full-time staff. When the students aren't there, then they have to start laying people off. The money comes in and the money goes out immediately. So no students, no teachers, no nothing. When I was there were about 20 full-time staff, and they were on half pay because it just wasn't sufficient. The money, the priority is for the animals they've got on site, and then anything else is additional, but they have to cut the staff back depending on what's coming in. So they still keep to try to educate the kids and enable them to access healthcare, but that's about what they can do in the grim times. The local people, they work in the kitchens, they work in the schools, the rehab unit, equine, drivers, gardeners, odd jobbers, tree fellers. When the hurricanes hit, they were banded together and they went round repairing roofs in the town, villages for people that couldn't afford their roofs. So they just respond wherever they can. They get staff wherever they can. There are 160 dogs over the 4 sites, about 20 cats. They've got, they take animals that are either lost their habitats because of deforestation. Increasingly, they're trying to remove animals that are being sold on the roadside to American tourists so they can take them home as pets. This a little spider monkey, and capuchins. Capuchins are vicious little buggers, I tell you. I was hoping to spend time working with wild animals, but they don't want you to become, they don't want them to be too sensitized to humans, so they're kept at a distance. Capuchins, I'll be happy to keep at a distance, but the spider monkeys, they used to put their arms through and wait to be groomed. They were so really difficult to stay away. Cats, as I say, and we went for a walk. There's a group of us going through a walk through La Honda, which is one of the forest parts there's a part of the project. And this is one of the rescued horses. They take horses that have been neglected and abused on farms or for tourists and so on. Most of them are sent to the north where they've got a lot of space, but some of them are just so damaged they can't even be near other horses. So they're just left to roam in the forest land that the school owns. And there's a chap that just goes round individually and keeps an eye on them. And this is one of those poor creatures. It's been there for some time, it's just still absolutely skeletal. It won't recover, it's just too anxious, unfortunately. From the top of the hill, looking down, this is some of the land that's owned by La Mariposa. Thick forest land, rich. When you do a 180-degree turn, this is the other hillside that isn't owned. And you can see all the terracing here, it's all been cleared. This hillside has just been sold to an American illegally. He's going to be planting jackfruit. Jackfruit is a vegetable of some description, tasteless. It's not, I don't know why you do it, but it takes enormous resources, water resources, and they're diverting the water that currently feeds 5 villages. And the villages don't know where they're going to get their water from once this is up and running. so that's the sort of thing that Paulette would be campaigning against and mobilising. But there are very good reasons why she can't do that now, which I will come on to shortly. But this is happening all over Nicaragua. You see plots that were thick forest and they're just now barren, or palm oil, or jackfruit, or avocados to meet our supermarket requirements. And it's just denuding the landscape and it's destroying resources for local people. I was working in the rehab unit. This is one of the fellas that came in. In Nicaragua, there's no advice on diet or nutrition, in spite of them having very high levels of diabetes and other illnesses. There is just, they don't recognise that sugar and so on as being problems. So no diet or advice on nutrition, no family planning, no antenatal care, no vitamins, no supplements. The result of that is you've got a high proportion of pregnancies with difficulties, very high levels of cerebral palsy, deformities, and kids born with malnutrition and kids in school with malnutrition. I became in contact with one mother of 12 with a child with cerebral palsy, and Juanita's sister was left 40 hours in labour with no pain relief. She was given a poultice. How her child fortunately was born normally, but how that happened I have no idea. But the number of kids that were damaged, that you saw them everywhere. This young guy, Herman, is 13, lives with his mum. He is in a wheelchair. Mum had to carry him up the mountain, up the hillside, to where the minibus collected him each day. And then she had to go down there and bring up his wheelchair. Honestly, when I say a hill, I call it a mountain. They call it a hill. How they do that and continue to smile, I just have no idea. These people have nothing, absolutely nothing. I put this one in just to prove that I was actually there. So the rehab unit, the emphasis is on strengthening mobility and so on. Without this, they get bow-legged. You get bow-legged with rickets anyway, but with malnutrition, if they're not playing on the ground, again they get sort of bow-leg, contractures, increased spasticity, and so on. One of the things I was a bit dubious about before I went was the value of equine therapy. I just thought, oh, it's kids patting a horse. But actually, what they do is remarkable. The kids just, they like getting on the horse, but also they have to grip with their legs. They have to start engaging their core muscles, just getting on the horse. And then they give them weights and ways of playing once they're on the horse. It's really quite strenuous and really good rehab for young kids. So I'm a convert to equine therapy. In addition, they've got the education program, the after schools program, where they're taught about food and animals and sustainability and nutrition, as well as they get a meal, a decent meal. They're encouraged to join with their family and the community in reforestation programs of the animals. And also they're taught English. So a lot of the American students, they're encouraged to read stories and play with the kids as a way of encouraging them to learn English, because once you've got English, then you've got access to employment. The current threats, well, the country was spiralling downwards anyway. COVID didn't help, but just hasn't bounced back. So it's got this continual economic spiral. It's now suffering from the influence of China. They gave China one of its major ports with control. China has control over what comes in and goes out of that port. There was the comment made that the government was losing grip. The Chinese government didn't want to see criticism of the Chinese government or its actions in the country. There was a student demonstration against that, and the result was that the army killed 300 students. They suppressed the student demonstration. More recently, over the past 3 years, they've abolished the press, which is a new thing from when I was last there. There's very strict government censorship, and opposition members are now being imprisoned. Another threat is the influence of the American evangelical churches. The Catholic Church was a voice against the existing government and the government actions. The response has been to deport the majority of priests from the country. They've been thrown out. And there's an influx of American evangelical churches in every village. Brand new glass, silver, sparkly crystals of worship. But there's no overarching church. These are individual churches that are funded by communities in America. So that they put the money together and they send out their pastor and do their evangelical worship there. The problem is some of these are more dubious characters. Now there's a system in Spanish law called denunciation, where if you're unhappy with one of your neighbours or somebody's doing something, you can denounce them. And the local authority, the Ayuntamiento, has an obligation to do something. This is in Spanish law. How this is translated here is that if somebody says something, it empowers the government to remove your possessions, to remove you from employment. And they have been funding some of these pastors to speak out about against government criticism. So they did that with PaulAt, one of the local churches, evangelical churches, spoke out about PaulAt, saying that she was subverting this, that, and everything else. And the government stepped in to remove Mariposa and confiscate everything. Fortunately, the local population weren't having any of it, but she can speak out, but she can't speak out very loudly now. She's being silent. She said, there's too much at stake here. I can't be too critical of local politicians, even though it's quite clear that they're on the table. Ortega is currently undergoing treatment on a fairly regular basis in Cuba. So his wife, Rosario Murillo, has taken over. She's like a Madame Ceausescu, very powerful vice president, corrupt poet. And of course she's in line to take over when Ortega dies. She's been set up for that. So La Mariposa is becoming quieter and campaigning. So at this point I was really depressed about what one can do. Oh dear. And then this is Luis. Luis was a tourist guide, and he works for Mariposa now. He does organising the tours and so on. He's sort of a fixer. And he lives locally. He's got 2 little daughters. And I was sort of asking him, what do you think? It's getting worse, and we're all having a sort of wrist slicing conversation over dinner one evening. And he said, yeah, it looks bad, but you've just got to remain optimistic. You have to have hope. And you can only do what you can do. And this is what I can do. I can do this, and I can do this, but I can't do that. So I have to focus on that. And I think that reflects the general feeling of Mariposa, for each of them, whether they're a gardener or a planter, or they're looking after the horses, or cooking in the garden, in the kitchens. They do what they can do, and they keep their head down, and they just hope that things are better in the future. On that, thank you. Rain on the spot, and you have been there. Has it changed much since you were last there?
Oh boy, honestly, I'm talking like 30 years, so my memory is terrible.
Oh, right.
But I remember going out to some of the projects. I'm just texting my friend as we speak, so she's my memory, so she'll remind me what we did. She may even know this place. So I'm sure she may have heard of it. Such a long time. Looks beautiful, pictures look amazing.
It's a beautiful
How I
country.
remember it.
It's a beautiful country. I love
I
this.
remember the lushness of it, but also the extreme poverty.
Questions? Right at the back.
I'm sure we've all been very touched by what you've shared. I know I certainly have. And when you see what's been going on, both down the centuries and now today, even more so.
Yeah.
And that just puts one question in my mind, Paul, and that is, what can we do? What can you tell us that we can do?
Well, it's very crude, but money is very important to keep the project going. I don't think there's anything more we can do other than help have a small focus. It's too big. There are too many pieces going on that we have no control over. We can't affect government policy, but we can help people support kids that have malnutrition, or provide family planning for a group of girls in a particular village. Yeah, what more can we do? I don't know.
Okay. Simple answer.
Yes. So.
I just wondered, Paul, how you became involved.
I previously had gone to a Spanish school that had other activities. They were craft activities like painting and sculpting. I really enjoyed the mixture of having a class in the morning and doing something in the afternoon. And I finished working at the food bank in Folkestone, and since moving here I hadn't done any voluntary work. I usually do some voluntary work in parallel with what else I'm doing. So I thought, why not do this and some Spanish lessons and some voluntary work. So I just Googled online and came up with this. It's a very well-known project in Nicaragua. It comes on usually number one. But other than that, I've got no direct links at all. No.
Is that the same one you're going to in Guatemala?
No.
Is there an American kind of Peace Corps type presence there? People doing, from the United States, doing what you're doing in any
No.
kind of...
No. Thank you for mentioning that. As well as they've got rid of the Peace Corps, the government, and they've closed down over 2,000 NGOs. Some of them quite major sized NGOs.
Oh, it's India.
Sorry, non-government organisations, big voluntary agencies, even large ones like the Red Cross, for example.
Doesn't that therefore threaten this organisation?
Oh, they're under threat. They have to keep their heads
Yeah.
down. That's why they can be critical, but they can't be too critical. I remember I might have circulated an early newsletter from Mariposa about this time last year. I think you circulated information. the tone of them has come down hugely. They were very critical about corruption and what was going on. Now it's much more moderate. They focus on, they report on the things that they're doing, the party that they've had, the planting programme that they've had, not diverting water or the price of prices being controlled in the marketplace, for example. They don't do that anymore. It's too dangerous for them.
How much is there Chinese influence today? Because to me,
it's enormous.
because that to me like sounds like Chinese style that no criticism of government and all others have disappeared. So
Yeah.
so that
China
sounds
is very
Chinese style.
influential. They've moved in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. After here, I went to El Salvador next, and they've just had a major road building, major buildings like town halls, libraries, the airport, all Chinese money. To get that money, they have to sign away a state that they will not object to any actions if China moves against Taiwan. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. And this isn't secret at all. I mean, it's very clear what the policy is. That they've already got 8, 9 countries there that are going to support China when they invade Taiwan. Very clear. It's just
What would be in it for the United States if they went in?
went in.
When I mean, to counter the Chinese, what would be in it for them?
Well, their history is not going in helpfully. They've always gone in with arms. They've always gone for oppression and violence. So Nicaragua's had such a history of this that they're not going to accept anything. They don't trust the Americans at all.
Right.
And why would you?
No.
They've done nothing to
So
earn their respect.
America's not the right country to go in and try to help them because
No.
nobody believes you anyhow.
It was interesting what you were saying about the American and evangelistic churches. I mean, are they kind of hand in glove with what
Yes.
with the government?
Yeah.
They're sort of-
Yeah.
So they've got their own axe to grind.
And they're very popular. They are very,
Yeah.
very popular. And they're full.
And wealthy,
They're full.
I guess, as well. So
They've got a lot of
Yeah,
money.
yeah.
And they're offering something. They're offering hope. And at the moment, there is no hope
yeah,
amongst the population. So they are very popular.
yeah.
And they're giving something that people want. But
It's
some of
kind
them,
of a sop.
and I don't want to cast all of them as being negative, but the Americans the government has identified those that can be used, and they're using them very powerfully.
And how do they feel about the Chinese going in?
Who?
The Nicaraguans.
I didn't ask specifically. I don't know. In El Salvador, they're suspicious, but they're getting the money. They're accepting it.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
Paul, are the American evangelicals connected to the right-wing movement in America?
I had no evidence of that, but I would imagine so. I would imagine so. They tend to be anti-communist, which is why they've gone there, to rescue them from communism and even worse, the Catholics.
Yeah.
How they would see it.
But it's strange that they're tolerated, isn't it? You know, they must be a benefit to the government to have them there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, they're bringing in money.
Yeah.
It's another lever that the government can use to control the
And
population.
maybe it does help to control because it gives an illusion
Yeah.
of an alternative. isn't it?
Are the Catholics hanging on?
Not really. No. If they put their head over the parapet, they're thrown out.
Do good. They're quite staunch in their religion.
Yes,
Catholics
and they
are
were
very,
even
very-
5 years ago when I was there last. It was still very much a Catholic country. And now there were 1 or 2 evangelical churches, but now it's in every village, not just one church, but multiple.
Is there a horse economy that people can go into having done horse therapy? I mean, horse-related jobs, I suppose.
They do use horses for transport.
Yeah,
They
sort of
tend to
thing, yeah.
they tend to be neglected and abused rather than. But it's, for me, the most upsetting thing is the lack of healthcare, and all these kids that are desperate, are just and have nothing. There's just no care for them, and without any health education, it's not going to improve. If you're not educating the girls, if you're not in school, when their mothers, the healthcare of the families decreases. We know that. If you want to improve the healthcare of a population, you educate the women, you educate the girls. And they're not doing that.
So is there a route into employment for young people when they leave Monaco? So,
What, the kids that are going to the after school programme?
yeah. Oh, it's after school, is it? It's not the...
Yes, they're going to regular school, but it's of very poor quality, and they're not learning very much. So this is to pick them up, to give them extra, to give them food as well, and to broaden their knowledge base, and to give them a bit of English.
Yeah. But have they had any success in moving young people into
I don't know. I didn't ask that question.
Otherwise it feels like a bit of a dead end for them, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Raising their aspirations and...
Are there other nations apart from the USA and China involved in any noticeable way?
Not really, no. They've all got their own problems. Guatemala, El Salvador.
The EU got a
No.
toehold,
No.
Africa.
No. They're what's it called? There are a number of French speakers coming in. 20% of every plane is full of people from.
Médecins Sans Frontières.
No, but they are French-speaking. What's a French-speaking nation in Africa?
Guyana, French Guyana.
Senegal.
Morocco, Algeria, Tangier.
Martinique,
Yeah.
Guadeloupe.
None of those. But there's another one.
The Congo.
Sierra Leone?
Yeah, what's the new one name for the Congo?
Rwanda.
Peru.
I don't.
It's
But
it's a lot
the
of
Nicaraguans are inviting them in, inviting them over, and then they open the northern borders. So all these French speakers are coming through, so they can go north to America. So yeah,
Right.
it's another way of irritating the
Yeah,
Americans by opening up the gates for Africans.
And they're not really doing anything
They're not
in
doing-
Nicaragua.
No.
No.
In fact, they're getting through as quickly as possible. They don't want them there.
Senegal.
Senegal. Thank you. Prize to that man. One more, and then we must go for lunch.
Sorry, Paul, me again. What you just said is quite interesting, and it makes me think, given how politics are in America, I'm thinking, just imagine that Trump got in again, and you're remembering what he was like with Mexican and wanting to build walls and everything. If Nicaragua is sort of funneling people from Africa through,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that would spur America to come in a very negative way into Nicaragua to stop that.
Yeah, question mark.
just wondering what happened with Ortega. I thought he was the good guy.
No, then he went a bad guy.
He's
He's a terrible guy
He
now.
was a good guy.
Back in the day.
He fought against the Somozas.
Yeah, that's what I.
He brought liberation. It was this socialist dream. It was all egalitarian communities. It was vibrant. But the Americans put an embargo around, and the country could not sustain itself. It needed imports, and no country around it could import. Otherwise, they'd lose their contracts with America. And so it slowly went down, and it's never recovered. He was ejected. He came back. He still came back as a goodie, but again, the economy's going down and down and down, and now he's really out of the fray. And Rosilio, the wife, has started cracking down with the killings of the students opposing, about abolition of the press and all the other bits and pieces, all the opposition, people imprisoned.
So is there any hope politically from within the country now?
No, she's in charge.
And there's no
resistance,
no movement
No.
in the way that there was?
No.
They're expelling a lot of people.
Mm.
And, you know, if they leave the country for any particular reason, they're very unlikely to get back in again.
Yeah.
Just get stopped.
I mean, given what you've said, presumably he had very little alternative than to turn to China, because
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
you can see why he would, you know, in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There is no organisation of
Yeah.
people.
El Salvador had a democratically elected president. He goes to the IMF for funds to build up his infrastructure, and the Americans say no.
Yeah.
A democratically elected, but no, because they didn't like him. So he went to China.
Yeah.
Now they're upset.
Yeah.
American foreign policy is very short-sighted. It's 10 past 1. If you want something to do. Thank you, Mark.